Welcome everybody. Today we'll be looking at the Smart App Launch Framework, also known as the Smart on FHIR standard. This is the part of the FHIR specification that is used by apps to connect to a FHIR server or an EHR. To understand the framework, we need two main components. We need a FHIR server that supports the standard, and we need an app or apps that we can use to connect to that FHIR server using the standard. So for the app side, I will be using Inferno. If you're not familiar with Inferno, it is an open source tool that is used for testing a FHIR server's conformance to FHIR specifications. It works like an external app that can connect to any FHIR server using the Smart on FHIR flows. The reason I'm using Inferno is because it is a great learning tool. It actually lets you see all the calls that are being made in the back end. That provides you an easy way if you're building your own app to compare the calls that your app is making versus what Inferno is making. For the FHIR server side, I will be using a MeldRx standalone workspace. MeldRx is a platform that provides backend as a service tailored for healthcare apps. MeldRx Workspace is a unit of the backend service that has its own URL, its own data store, its user management, as well as a way to manage app permissions. MeldRx Workspace has a lot of features for external apps, but it can also be used just as a FHIR server, and that's what we will be doing today. You can create a free MeldRx Workspace by signing up on one of the links in the description below. Everything I'll be doing today can be done as part of that subscription. So let's get started. Okay, so I am on the Inferno website at inferno.healthit.gov, and I'm just going to sign in using all the default options to get to the test page. So we will be starting with the standalone launch and test that is available in Inferno. For that is called the standalone patient app. Inferno gives a pretty good description of kind of what they're going to do in the test, and this is really helpful to read as well as after the test, so to understand kind of what all is done. It also gives you links to basically read more about the Smart on FHIR specs. I'm going to click on this run test button here so I can actually see what exactly does it need to do the test. And what it is basically asking here is what an external app will need to connect to a FHIR server. So it needs a FHIR server URL or a FHIR endpoint. It needs a client ID and a client secret. And then it needs a set of scopes. Scopes are what will really differ between the three Smart on FHIR flows that we will be looking at. So one thing I'll do here before I do anything else is I'm going to just go remove all these scopes just to simplify this. And I'm going to just put a wildcard scope to just say I want to read all the patient data. All those scopes are there to test that the FHIR server supports that all scope. We are not really interested too much in the testing. We are just trying to understand the flows. What is really important in this screen here is this scope called launch patient. And what that basically means is that the app that will be connecting here is telling the FHIR server that I want you to let me select a particular patient that I want to work with. And then the app will work in the context of that patient. And when we go to the EHR launch scope, you'll see how it differs there. I am going to make the PKCE enabled. This is something that our FHIR server requires. And honestly, I think most of the FHIR servers require that now. So with that, we are ready to go ahead and provision our FHIR server on MeldRx. So go to app.meldrx.com. And if you don't already have an account, you can go to register and create an account. I've already created an account and I'm logged in. So I'm going to go straight to this tab called Workspaces. And I'm going to go ahead and create my first workspace, which, as I said before, is a FHIR server and a lot more. So I'm going to click on Create Workspace, and then I'm going to be selecting the standalone workspace. I'm going to click Next. I'm just going to give it a name. It can be any name. And I'm going to click Create Workspace, and that gives me that URL. I'm going to just copy that URL and paste it here so that I have that taken care of. And then I'm going to go back in here and go back to the workspaces. So at this point, I have a FHIR server created, but obviously I don't have any data in it. So I'm going to go ahead and import some data in it. So we allow you to import like a FHIR bundle. So I have a FHIR bundle here that I can import. And then I'm also going to go ahead and import a CCDA. So if I just go back in here, like pick one of my CCDAs, we're going to pick Alice Newman. If you have been working in the EHR, in any EHR in the last decade or so in the US, you will recognize Alice Newman. So if I give it a few seconds, it will refresh. And now you can see there are 3 patients loaded in the system. And I can just go ahead and open Alice Newman in an app and just see that, okay, Alice Newman is loaded. And again, all of this data should be pretty familiar to anyone who's seen the CCD of Alice Newman. So with that, we basically have our patients. We have a FHIR server. We have some patients loaded into the FHIR server. So the next thing we need is basically an app that is registered. So we need to register an app in the FHIR server system that we will be using to connect to it. So head over back to the MeldRx, and I'm going to go back to my main screen, and I'm going to click on apps, and I'm going to register a new app. So we're just going to call this Inferno Confidential, because this is a confidential app that we will be building. And again, it really doesn't matter a patient or a provider. It's basically a user-based workflow. I'll just select provider. I'm going to select confidential in here. And then our scopes here should match exactly the scopes that we have here. Again, we can have more scopes in the app, but we need to make sure all of these scopes are available in the app. So let me just go and pick up those scopes. So there are offline access, profile, OpenID, FHIR URL, and then launch patient. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see 1, 2, 3. Oh, we have the patient.read. So let me pick up the patient start.read. So that gives us all the scopes we need. And then the redirect URL is the redirect URL of the app. So in this case, it is the redirect URL that Inferno gives us. If you are building an app using the Smart on FHIR flow, that will be the redirect URL of your app that you will be putting in here. Okay, I'm going to click next. We're going to skip the linked apps in here, and I'm not going to create a workspace because I've already created it. So that basically creates the app for me. I'm going to copy both this. So I'm going to first copy the client ID, and I'm going to go paste that client ID in there. And then I'm going to copy the client secret, and I'm going to go back there and paste the client secret there. So that should be all that we need. So again, what we are doing in here is, imagine this is an external app that is connecting to that FHIR server. These are the configurations that you have put into it. And then I will click on the submit button. So what is happening at this point is the app Inferno, in this case, is basically connecting to the FHIR server. It has done a discovery on its endpoint, and it has found all the endpoints that it needs to authorize it. And it's asking me to proceed to basically log in. Now I'm already logged in because I have the app open on the other side. So I'm not going to see a login screen. It's going to take me straight away to a screen where I can search for patients. And this is again because we had selected that launch patient scope, that it is asking me to select a patient. So I'm going to select this James Smith patient because this is a patient that has the data that Inferno kind of looks for. So it's a very comprehensive package we have created to pass all the Inferno data sets. And what you will see in here is that there's all the green marks in here. But again, what we are really interested in here is to go and look at what is happening behind the scenes. And the way you can see that is if you start expanding each of these tests, there are some of these tests which will have this kind of a globe icon on it. And they will actually show you all the details of the calls that basically this app made in order to connect to the FHIR server and what is the response it actually got back. So again, as I said, this is very, very helpful if you are basically building an app and you're trying to connect to it and you're getting some errors and you know basically what call to make. You can kind of see from here. And then if I go all the way down, you can actually see that all of the call that it made to get all the different data elements. So if I just go to the conditions in here, I can see actually that it made the call to what call did it make to actually get the conditions. So that's the full call where it was passing a particular patient ID. This patient ID was retrieved from the original launch flow. And then if I go to the response, you can actually see the bundle that it got back from the FHIR server. So very helpful tool to see whatever is going under the hood as you start testing and you start to understand what the different Smart on FHIR flows are. So that was basically the standalone launch. The next what we are going to look into is the EHR launch. So the EHR launch is available under the EHR Practitioner app. and again gives a really good description about what the launch is and how it works. So definitely recommend reading it. What we need to do before we can actually launch it, the EHR launch in here, is that we need actually a sample EHR. Because the way the EHR launch works is that the launch or the launch of the app is actually happening from within the EHR. So the key difference between a standalone launch and an EHR launch is that the standalone launch is that I have an app on my desktop or on my phone or a web browser and I go and launch it from there. In the EHR launch, I am basically launching the app from within the EHR. So we need an EHR to basically test that out. We have a test app that we have built that you can use for this. So I'm going to go and browse to that app now. It's basically available at smart@meldrx.com. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and log in with my account, which allows me to very quickly launch the EHR app from this particular portal. But before I can do that, I need to make sure that I can actually create an app in my system that will be used by this app to launch the EHR. So even the EHR that we are using in here is an app that needs to be registered in the FHIR server. Since we are building everything from scratch, we actually need to do that too. So I'm going to go ahead back to my portal. I'm going to go into apps and I'm going to register a new app. I'm going to just call it an EHR app. It's going to be again a provider app. This time I'm going to actually select public. I'm going to go ahead and select the scopes, and scopes that I'm going to really select here is because I want this app to be having full access. So I can just select patient star. That's really the only scopes that I need. And for the redirect URL, I can actually go to that app and we make that URL available in here. So I'm just going to copy that URL, come back in there and copy that URL in here. Click next, no workspace. So now I have an app registered in the system that I can use through my EHR, through my sample EHR app to connect to it. So I'm going to go back to that app, and right now you'll see that I don't see that app in here, but if I refresh it, I should be able to see that app. So what I'm basically doing is similar to Inferno, I'm actually now using another app to connect to the same workspace, but using a different app. And I'm going to give this the scope of OpenID profile and patient star. So you can think of this as like I'm using an EHR that is built on that particular FHIR server. So I'm going to click on connect in here. You'll see a similar experience. It asks me for permissions. I log in and I end up on what is our sample app as a EHR plus. And if I click on the search, I'm going to see the same patients that I was seeing on the portal site. I'm going to go ahead and click on James Smith in here, and this is designed a little differently to allow us to basically launch external apps. So imagine this is like an EHR where you are in a patient chart, and from the patient chart, you have different smart on FHIR apps. And one of those apps is an Inferno app that I can launch from within the patient chart. And you can look at the URL in here that shows up here. It's basically the URL that will be going to that Inferno app. And the way you find that URL is if I go back to my Inferno and I click on the run tests in here, so it will tell me that this is the URL that I need to configure in my EHR to basically launch the app. The redirect URL is the same, so we will be using the same app to launch this, so we don't need to add that redirect URL. The other things that it is asking here is the client ID and the client secret. So as I said, we are going to use the same client ID and secret, so I can actually go back in here. I can go back to our apps and we can copy this client ID, which was A83. So if I go back in here, so I'm going to copy that, and I think I have the secret still in my clipboard. So there is the secret. And what we are going to do here is, in like we did before, just to keep our focus on the launch, I'm going to delete all the detailed scopes and just put a wildcard scope in there. So what we are doing in this case is that we are saying is that let me access everything that I as a user can read. But again, the key difference here is if you notice it in here, it's basically saying that this is a launch scope and not a launch/patient scope. What that basically means is that this particular app is going to have the permission to launch the patient context from the external app, which we will be using the EHR app from. So This basically is the launch scope that is added in here. Now, in order to do that, I do need to add these two scopes because we are using the same app. So I need to go back in there into my Inferno confidential app and just make sure that I can add those additional scopes in there. So I'm going to add user star.read, and then let me also add the launch scope in there. If it will let me add the scope. Yep, there we go. Again, I don't need a new redirect URL because it's the same one. So I'm going to save in here. Now, one thing we need to do in here is like before I can submit this is like, since this is an EHR launch, what that basically means is that the app is always running and the EHR, the user is basically clicking a button from the EHR to launch that app. So the way Inferno basically allows you to test is when I click this submit button, it creates a new session, which is now waiting for like a session for the same FHIR server to be launched from external app. So I'm going to go to my EHR plus app, and from there I'm going to click on this Inferno, which should take me into that session. So what just happened there is like it basically, I was in the EHR, I launched my app, it has passed me that patient that was selected in that EHR, and now I can continue authorizing the server the way I did before. And if I go in there, I will basically end up with where now it is basically connecting to the FHIR server using the EHR launch and making all the calls and doing the same things as it was doing before. But in this case, the launch context came from the EHR instead of me having to select a patient at the start. So we did a video where we actually compared the two launches along with like the CDS hooks and other things. So if you're not familiar with the launch, definitely recommend to go and check out. We'll put that link in the description too. But the other thing that you can really explore in here again is like you can actually go and look into all the calls that Inferno made in here behind the scenes to connect to the FHIR server and get that data in there. So standalone launch and the EHR launch are what are called as the two user-based workflows. In both these cases, we have a user that has permission to the FHIR server that is using an app to connect to that FHIR server and doing some actions. We also saw a public client using the same kind of a flow from the EHR launch. The last flow that we want to look into is what is called as a system app flow. In order to look into it, and we'll be doing what is known as a bulk export. It's the FHIR bulk export standard, which by default uses a system scope. So again, just to kind of understand kind of what the test is going on in here is, so if you click on that test, you'll see it basically requires a FHIR URL. It requires a FHIR token endpoint. Usually that token endpoint can be pulled in from the FHIR URL, but for some reason it just wants it here. And then it has a client ID. It has a very specific scope. And then it has some encryption method. And then like what it really needs is a group. So what this group is, in the previous two flows, we are working in the scope of an individual patient. The bulk export works in a context of multiple patients. So this is like a population health app where I want multiple patients and I want to be able to pull some data on multiple patients together. So let's go ahead and set this up first on our portal, and then we'll start filling these screens up one by one. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my MeldRx portal, and I'm going to register a new app. I'm going to just call it bulk export. And this time I'm actually going to use a system app because we are using the system app workflow. Again, from a scope perspective, I'm only going to be using system star.read. That's the only one I need. I'm going to click next. I'm going to click next from here. This is again the same screens we have seen before. And when I come in here, you'll see that I have a client ID and I have a client secret. So I am going to copy that client ID, but I'm not going to copy that client secret, and I'll tell you that in a minute. If I go back to the apps, I'm going to go back into that bulk export app in there. And if you go back to the system app logic in here, it does not actually use client secret. So it actually uses like what is called as a JWKS set URL. So let me just put my client ID in here so that I don't lose it from the clipboard. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this JWKS URL from here, go back into my portal. Let me just close all these extra screens. Go back into my portal. I'm going to delete this secret because we are not going to be using a secret, and I'm going to copy that JWKS URI there. So again, what I basically did was is like we have created a system app. That system app obviously needs a secret to connect to it. That secret is not like a known secret. It is basically a JWKS secret, which Inferno provides. So we can basically put that secret, that URL in here, and when the app is connecting, it will automatically get the keys and make those calls. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And then I'm going to go ahead and head back to this to see what else do we need in here. So the first thing we need here is the FHIR server URL. So let me just go and get it again, because so if I go in here, I can just click on it to copy that FHIR server URL. I'm going to copy that FHIR server URL in here. And again, as I said, the token endpoint, you can usually get it from the FHIR server URL. And the way you get it is you can actually go to the metadata endpoint. And if you look through it, there is a security extensions in there, and there you will be able to see the token endpoint. So I'm just going to copy this token endpoint from here, take it back there, copy the token. Oops, doesn't look like it. I copy the token endpoint. Now we do use RS384. So I'm going to change it to that. And then, as I said, the last part of this is that we need to actually create a group in the FHIR server and then add some patients to it. So I'm going to go back to my workspace. So let me get into the workspace, and we have a very easy way to create groups in here. So I'm going to click on the group tab. I'm going to click create group. Let me just create a group called Inferno. So once that group is created, obviously it doesn't have any patients. So what I can do is I can go to the patients tab, and we are going to add a couple of our patients to the group, which we can easily do from the action menu in here. So I'm just going to go and say that let's add our James Smith, and we will also add this patient in there. By the way, the second patient that shows undefined is a patient that is basically doesn't have a name for a particular reason. There is Inferno does some tests to make sure that the FHIR server can support missing values. So we have a patient that has some on purpose some missing values, so it actually passes those tests. So I have added those two patients to the group. So if I go back to the group, you can see I have a group in here and it is showing those two patients. I can go and just look at those patients in there, but that's not what I'm really interested in right now. We know we added those patients. So I'm just going to come back into my test here, copy the group ID. And the other thing I need is basically the patient IDs. And again, there's a really easy way to do that. We actually let you copy that from here. So I can just copy those IDs from there, and those are the two IDs that it needs. That's all that I should need in here. It is a pretty small data set, so we can actually do it in under 180 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it, and I'm going to let it run. So what is basically happening at this point is that the Inferno basically using the Smart on FHIR app tried to connect to the FHIR server, and it first does some false test where it basically tries to connect using a false key, and the failure of that test is supposed to pass it. But you see that when it actually tried to connect to the server, it failed, and we received a 403. A 403 means that I don't have the permission, and I was expecting this because when we did the standalone and the EHR practitioner launches, we were connecting in the user scope and we were already logged in. But the system app is actually using an app credential under a system app flow. So there is no way for the FHIR server to know that I'm supposed to allow this particular app. So every FHIR server has a different way of configuring this. So what we have actually done here is if I go back to my workspace, I can go under settings, I can go under apps, and I'm going to basically say in here is that I want to allow the bulk export app to have a read-only access to my workspace. So that should now basically allow that app to come in there. So let me just go ahead and run the test again. And this time it should be able to get the right key, accept it. And once it's accepted, what it will actually do is it's going to make what are called as bulk export calls of various resources. So this can take a while because it's basically creating all those resources and exporting it. So I'll give it a few seconds and I'll try to forward this. Okay, there we go. So all of the resources have been exported. And again, we can go ahead and look into some of these. So if I go, this is basically the original test where it connected. And then I can like go to any one of them and say like, okay, let me just see what were the calls. So this is the call where it was trying to get one of the resources. And if I go in there, I can actually see this is what is called as the FHIR bulk export, the ND-JSON format. But I can actually see what is all the data that it got back from. So again, there's a lot more that we can dig into and understand what these flows are. We will be doing like detailed sessions and to dig deeper into like kind of what goes behind the scenes. But hopefully this gives a good overview of how these three flows work within Inferno. I hope that gives you a good overview of the Smart on FHIR flows and how you can get your apps connected to a FHIR server or an EHR using this. Please feel free to reach out to our team if you have any questions or comments. Thanks again for watching and happy coding.